What inspired you to launch this rent strike?
I'll take the first one if it's okay, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we're doing this because a lot of people don't have a choice to have the ability to pay rent in this month and in upcoming months. A lot of people around the city and around the country have already run out of money, or they don't have a lot left. Some people have very little and are hoping that things don't get worse. And there are still some people who might be okay right now and thinking that things are going to work out, but nobody really knows for sure because of unemployment and underemployment. So that's the uncertainty of the situation. But what we do know is that people are getting sick, people are losing their jobs, they're having their hours cut, schools are closed, lines at grocery stores and pharmacies are long, and people are feeling a lot of pressure to kind of prepare for the worst. And we know that we need to be responsible first and foremost for our own well-being, our family's well-being, and our neighbors' well-being. And a lot of people are feeling scared and alone in these circumstances. A lot of people need some immediate and long-term help to deal with this crisis. And a lot more people are going to be added to that group very soon as the crisis unfolds. And we think that overall, the bottom line is essentially that there's no reason that any tenant should feel forced to hand over so much money in rent payments to landlords and others when we're faced with all of that uncertainty. If we proceed to use our money, our limited money on rent, then we're not going to have it available to purchase food and medicine and other essentials going forward. And that goes for ourselves, our families, if we're caretakers, our friends, our neighbors, or our coworkers. If we give the money away, we're not going to have it for anybody at all. And since we're in the middle of a pandemic, then even more than usual, the prospect of not having money for those things is even more terrifying. And we believe that tenants and us, we shouldn't be forced to go without means of paying for those essentials that we need, just because those with more means say that we should. We feel very confident that the responsible choice for tenants is to not pay their rent and withhold that money in order to provide for their immediate and future needs going forward.
If you're not going to pay rent for April, are you expecting to maybe like pay for that rent, like put it on hold, pay for it later, or would you just be continuing on down the road when things settle down? Like, let's say things are normal in June and you would just continue on from there.
I just don't think that's really feasible, because if we're not working now, where would this extra money come from? Like, there's no way that we can save up money that we're not already getting to pay back. Like, most people can, at least the people that I'm talking about and talking to, are living paycheck to paycheck already. So how can we save up a paycheck that we don't have?
Okay.
Yeah, I would just to add on to that a lot of people are going to be talking about the CERB and an EI as a potential means for saving that money. But facts are right now, there are millions of people across the country and thousands in Guelph who are not going to qualify for either of those benefits. And that group includes, but is not limited to, as far as we understand, people who have partially lost their employment, but not fully lost their employment. So if somebody has lost 90% of the work that they usually have, then they won't qualify for CERB or EI. There's also anybody who made less than $5,000 in 2019, which could include a lot of people who were on unpaid parental leave, or young people who are just trying to enter the workforce now, who are also in need of support. And there are also over 1 million international students, approximately, who will not be qualifying for either of those supports. There are refugees, there are undocumented workers, and we also have many people who rely on programs like Ontario Works and ODSP, who would not be eligible and are also facing increase in cost of living right now due to scarcity of resources and rising food costs. So for every person in that group, they have no, and who have lost income as a result of this crisis, and or have lost income, I should say. There's no means for saving up money in order to make back payments and rent later on. So presently, the reasonable option for people in that situation is to continue to withhold rent until there is a viable situation for them to be able to make it day by day.
Yeah, I'd like to add in there, just like for example, in my case, I do roadside assistance for work, and I'm technically an independent contractor. So no one's driving anywhere, and so I'm not exactly getting any business, but neither will I qualify for CERB, nor will my employer be paying anything out from the, what was that program called? It was just where they're paying up to 75% of it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I know what you mean.
I have no expected wage because I'm not paid a wage, so I'm kind of screwed here. And it's not like there are many people in my situation, like, who are gig economy workers, but are also deemed essential. Like, I work 70 hours a week, and I'm not going to be able to make rent.
I would add to that for people who are going to be receiving EI, EI hands out a maximum of 55% of people's usual employment income. And we live in a country where nearly half of people's household expenses are absorbed by the cost of housing. So for people that leaves people 5%, or a little bit more perhaps, of their usual income in order to pay for everything that's not housing. And if we have a widespread situation where people are unable to pay for food or medicine or other essentials, then that will only exacerbate this crisis as people resort to desperation to get food and other essentials, and also fall ill and need medical attention as they are unable to purchase the medication that they need. This includes people who have asthma, who I believe pay more than $100 at least. I think I know somebody who said they pay $160 a month just for asthma medication. And if people in that situation can't buy those meds, then they're put at heightened risk of having very serious conditions due to COVID-19. Also, for people who are going to get CERB, even if they are eligible, they're not going to be able to get any sort of payment in their bank accounts until at least April 16th, from our understanding. The application window opens on April 6th, and processing time is estimated at 10 days. So no matter how much CERB is, it's not going to be available for people to pay rent on April 1st. And even for people who do get it, $2,000 a month is not going to be enough for many people across the country, including a lot of people in Guelph who, we live in a city where the average cost of a one-bedroom apartment per month is at least $1,200 from the work that we've been reading. I think there was a report last year, though, that estimated it at over $1,500. So if you're asking a single parent who has a few kids and is renting a one-bedroom apartment, and they're the only person who's going to get CERB, then they're living with about $500 per month for a whole family. And that's not going to cover the cost of living, which is much higher than that per person, let alone for a whole family.
Yeah, I believe the estimated cost of living in Guelph is approximately 1,200. Well, no, is it $1,000 for a month? So that's not really feasible for someone to live off of half of that for a month.
Mhm. So I'm going to assume that the three of you, you're all renters.
Yes.
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 Have you told your landlord that you're not going to be paying rent tomorrow?
I'll start with that one if it's fine, guys.
Yeah.
So I have not informed my landlord that I would be participating in this at this stage, but I do plan to. I did early on, about 2 weeks ago, send an initial email to my property manager, who I was in immediate contact with, asking him to participate in lobbying to the government for better supports for renters so that they have a viable means of making rent payments. And the response that I got was first to be ignored for quite some time. I sent a follow-up email asking if it was received and if the property manager had thought about it, at which I was told that I would be receiving an email from my landlord quite soon in response. And the response was essentially that rent is expected on April 1st, and I should do everything I can to apply for the supports that are being made available by various levels of government. I sent a response back providing analysis of why those supports are inadequate and why those supports would be partially responsible for a widespread crisis in the rental market as people are unable to make payments. And I continue to have no signs of support from either my property manager or my landlord on a lobbying effort. So I feel that I did my due diligence in trying to get those individuals on board and collaboration to do something about this. But at this stage, I don't see any signs that they're willing to help.
And did you want to go next? Or
Sure. Yeah, I also tried to reach out to my my landlord, and she asked why I would not be able to make rent, and I explained my situation to her, that I was no longer working because of COVID, and she told me to email the property manager, and after emailing the property manager, I've gotten no response. So
my own situation is just an individual. This is the only property he owns that he rents out. I haven't mentioned anything to him yet. I intend to, I intend to let him know anyway that I'm not paying rent and that we're taking collective action. That I'm not communicating with him on a one-on-one basis, not bargaining. You know.
Are you at all concerned that this could lead to some potential conflicts with your living situation?
Annie, you haven't led off yet. You want to tackle that?
Sure. Let me just think for a second. Well, I don't believe so. Especially if, especially considering that, well, this rent strike is, we hope to achieve, well, at least hopefully a government response, if not a bank response as well, such that our rents are canceled, not just deferred, not just evictions deferred. So though it's possible I may see some retaliation, legal retaliation, I should say, from my landlord. He is actually a working class fellow. He's fairly been understanding the entire time I've lived here, and well, because I haven't communicated with him yet, but I'm sure he'll understand the situation we're in.
Moon, anything to add?
No, thank you.
Okay. I'll say that I fully expect that there will be retaliation, if not from our own landlords, but from many around town who are seeing missed payments from their tenants. I think they will start to issue N4s, to be specific, notices to evacuate for failure to pay. But at present, the Landlord and Tenant Board is under orders from the court to not issue any evictions for an indefinite moratorium. We're hoping that that continues, because it's only fair that people should be allowed to retain the housing situation that they are currently in, because people are at stay-at-home orders from various levels of governments. And if people are ordered to evacuate their homes, then they cannot comply with those stay-at-home orders. We believe that any eviction that could hypothetically be served during the time of this pandemic and unemployment crisis would further jeopardize public health, as people are forced to go into alternative living situations and therefore enter contact with more people than they would otherwise. And additionally, if people are unable to find alternative living conditions, then they would be forced by the circumstances of an eviction to have no home. The rental market right now is very, very difficult. It's hard to get showings because people don't want to spread COVID-19. And I think it's only fair that no evictions should be allowed to occur indefinitely.
So now I didn't get a chance to talk to Mike Schreiner. Eli did that before before this, all this stuff got passed around. He had mentioned that he's advocating for landlords and tenants to continue to push the provincial government anyways, to take more action on this. And Dustin, I know you had mentioned that, of bringing this to your landlord and property management about advocating for action for the government. Do you feel that sort of response is enough, or do you think that what you're doing is maybe more poignant at this point?
I think we're in a situation where tenants, regardless of any lobbying or whatever else, we're in a situation where many of us are forced to keep our money in order to keep ourselves safe. So independent of any lobbying efforts, the first step is for tenants to withhold their rent money and ensure that they have their short-term needs and long-term needs secured. That's the rational response for tenants in this situation, rather than waiting for a government program to come in to rescue, because we have no assurance at this point that any of those potential programs that are being talked about are going to make it into people's hands so that they can take care of themselves. People collectively acting on something like this and withholding their rent and refusing evictions and protecting each other from evictions, that has a lot more, like you said, poignancy and it's immediate action that we can take as a collective to protect each other. I am encouraged by discussions that are happening with the federal NDP right now. Nikki Ashton did a Facebook Live yesterday and was discussing this situation exactly. And she said now that the members of the federal NDP are pushing to have rent, debt, utilities, and mortgage payments all canceled, not deferred, for up to 4 months, which is the same time period that CERB is being discussed to apply to. I think that's a very reasonable response that the federal government could work with provincial governments to enact. I think it's the only viable option for the continuation of any resemblance of a stable housing market, and to protect people from falling into further debt and further inequity between regular people and the banks and very wealthy people who are controlling the housing market through their private investments.
And again, I just wanted to stress that a lot of people cannot pay their rent right now. It's not just withholding your rent if you can. A lot of people do not have the money to pay their rent. They have not been working enough to pay their rent. There's a significant gap between when me, for example, when I stop working versus when CERB will potentially start. So a lot of people cannot afford to pay rent right now as well. It's not like we have the full amount to pay rent as well. Like when people aren't working, there's a gap in that income, and we need to protect those people as well, right? We're also trying to protect the most marginalized, the most vulnerable people in our population as well, who are working low wages and who have been off work for quite some time and who will not receive funding for quite some time.
We can't ask people to just go hungry, hoping that their representatives will lobby correctly such that they get food retroactively. It doesn't work that way.
I also want to add, Graham, since you brought up Mike Schreiner, I'm aware of what he's pushing for right now in his efforts as a representative, which is universal basic income. And I just want to say that the logistics of an emergency UBI will likely exclude large swaths of the population for a certain amount of time. An emergency UBI would be very easy to enact for people who filed their taxes for 2018 because their bank accounts are already known and connected to the CRA. So those would be quick and easy payments. But again, for a lot of people, including international students who don't have access to Service Canada or the CRA in the first place, refugees, undocumented workers, and many other people, they will not have access to an emergency UPI without some form of bureaucratic process that they would have to take the burden on themselves to file some kind of probably very convoluted paperwork. So that's why we think it's responsible for people in that situation to withhold their rent until further notice because they don't know when or if they're going to be receiving payments at all.
So Dustin, I know you touched on it a bit there about potential government response. You know, the NDP, federal NDP has mentioned the, you know, putting the 4-month cancellation on. I know provincial NDP has talked about, I guess it kind of falls under the UBI, like an emergency rental support fund or something along those lines. Do you think those are the best ways forward, or is there another option that I'm not thinking of here?
I'm very critical of the Ontario NDP plan. What they've said in their letter to Doug Ford is that they would like an 80% rent subsidy to be paid to tenants, which at first glance sounds pretty good. I think it would help a lot of people. Absolutely, I'm not going to deny that. But it is, as Andrea Horvath's letter said, it is only available for people who are eligible for CERB or EI. So that still would exclude all of the people who I've been talking about. And I think that's an unacceptable measure to be included in that. If people are going to get a rent subsidy, it should be actually universally available and on short order. So I remain firm that regardless of what governments do, tenants should not be asked to take the burden of this crisis when often we are the people with the least means and the least assets. None of us, not many tenants have investments in the real estate market. And we have to, I think, acknowledge that housing, just because it's, you know, people expect that to be a really stable investment market, but it is an investment market nonetheless, and any investment comes with risk. So anybody who has purchased a home and is renting it out to people thinking that they should be owed the same amount of money no matter what the market conditions are, we think that's extremely unfair to tenants who are only looking for a place to live, and that the people who are in that situation should have emergency funding in order to cover the risk that is borne by their investment. I think that's important for any landlord in this situation to be able to acknowledge that you should always have emergency funding available in case of non-payment or damage to the property. You know, what if the roof caves in? There needs to be an emergency fund that landlords have, and I expect they do. So they have a greater ability to take the fallout from this crisis than tenants do.
So what has the feedback been like on the Guelph campaign? Like I know there's been the one that's gotten the most attention in Canada. There's the one in Parkdale I think it's the Parkdale neighborhood in Toronto. There's several tenants in one building aren't going to be paying rent tomorrow. And there's been others that have popped up. So what's the feedback been like here? Do you know how many people are not going to be paying rent tomorrow through this campaign anyways?
So this isn't exactly answering your question directly, but I want to comment on a lot of the feedback that we've been getting from the community at large. A lot of people think that us, by enacting and pushing for this movement to occur, they think that we want landlords and homeowners to not have a place to live. They think that we want people to they think that we want non-tenants to be kicked to the curb, to not have food, to not have medicine that they need. And that's not the case at all. We think it's incredibly unjust that any person in the midst of this crisis should be evicted or foreclosed upon. Everybody has a right to housing that should be upheld by the various systems that we find ourselves in. So I just want to correct the record on that. We are advocating for tenants, but that does not mean that we have ill will towards any individual human beings who find themselves in dire straits in this crisis. While we are not currently advocating on everyone's behalf, we believe that this movement has a lot of potential, as we've seen with the NDP proposal, to not only cancel rent, but also to cancel mortgage payments. We would also say that for landlords who find themselves in precarious positions due to this crisis and due to widespread inability to pay rent, they are fully able and welcomed to start a movement as well to withhold debt payments that would otherwise put them into a similar crisis as tenants are facing right now. They can take our lead, they can take inspiration from what we're doing and start to withhold money from the banks. We believe that ultimately it's the banks who should be bearing the weight of this crisis because the people who live in this country we literally cannot afford to. In terms of our numbers, that's not something that I think we're willing to share at this point. We will say that there is a very large appetite across the city for something like this. There are many people who will not be able to make their payments, and we've heard very, very difficult stories from them. A lot of people have come forward and said that their landlords are being extremely unfair in the circumstances and asking for people's financial records to prove that they can't pay, which landlords do not have the right to. Landlords do not have the right to see people's financial records in order to prove failure to pay. That has to be resolved at the landlord and tenant board, which is currently closed. I kind of lost my train of thought there. I'll just say that again, there's a large appetite for this now, and it will only increase as the month of April goes by and more people realize that they are in a situation of financial inviability, unless government measures are enacted to prevent that or mitigate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like from what we've seen, just people are scared. Like people have come to us asking for, well, yeah, like as Dustin said, they've, asking, just letting us know that what their landlords have said, asking them if it's legal, if they have anything to fear, that, bring legal concerns or logistical concerns to us. Just, yeah, this is a scary time. We're hoping to offer some sort of, some assurance, some peace of mind.
I don't have any other questions right now. Was there anything that any of you guys want to add or feel that I should know about or might be missing here?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think we've covered everything. I think, everything we've said has been, well, I think we've covered everything. I think, everything we've said has been, well, I think we've covered everything. 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 Hmm. Good question. Let me think.
It's not open-ended at all.
So one question that we kind of prepared for was something that we've seen a lot in online discussions, which is the idea that a lot of landlords are not big corporate investors. A lot of them really truly rely on income from properties that they have in order to get by at present. An example of this would be a property owner who is elderly and living off of a pension that's inadequate to meet their needs, or somebody who is now disabled, who owns a property and rents it out in order to make ends meet. And I just want to reiterate again, we don't want anybody to lose a place to live as a result of this crisis. And we don't think it's fair that anybody who's on ODSP or Ontario Works or pensions or old age security or et cetera should be kicked to the curb. We want to make that very clear. Anybody who's in that situation, I'm going to urge them to reach out to the Guelph Renters Union so that we can have a discussion about their circumstances. And I would also say again that it's a good idea for people in that situation to start organizing together for a mortgage strike. You can take inspiration from us. All of our resources are available at the Guelph Renters Union website. They're accessible for anybody to modify into a strike against the banks in order to achieve similar goals. So again, anybody who finds themselves in precarity due to this, please reach out to us. We can have a discussion about it, and also consider organizing amongst yourselves and people who are in similar situations as you in order to do something similar.
I'd just like to jump off something that Dustin was saying earlier. It's a lot of our detractors are treating this like a zero-sum game where if renters win out, then people who have, even just people who have homes, let alone who are landlords, lose. But that doesn't need to be the way that it turns out. We can all win in this. There is a lot to gain for everybody so long as we are in this together.
Yeah, and I'll say that I fundamentally believe that people organizing together without being given permission is the best way to accomplish that, especially in times of crisis. Various levels of government need to find the ability to listen to people on the ground. And usually they only find the ability to listen when the people on the ground are making noise and being disobedient in a way, but in a peaceful manner. So that's one of our core philosophies as a movement here. We're about tenant-to-tenant solidarity, and we're not waiting for permission to organize in our own best interests. And we would recommend that homeowners who are in debt to their creditors would do the same, so that everybody has a home to live in throughout the course of this crisis and always, and so that there are no undue profits going to individuals and institutions who do not need that money.
Okay. Moon, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you. I think everyone did a great job.
Oh, okay. All right, and everyone, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I really do appreciate it. Good luck tomorrow, and I imagine we'll be talking again sometime soon.
Good. Okay.